Hi, it's Damianne, and today I'm going to be talking about the Stanford prison experiment of 1971. This was an experiment exploring the effects of becoming a prisoner or a prison guard, and both the experiment and the results are highly controversial and seem to have caused some lasting psychological damage to some of the participants in it. The Stanford prison experiment was conducted by a team of researchers at Stanford University and led by Philip Zimbardo, then the head of their psychology department. It consisted of 24 undergraduates who were selected out of 70 possible participants, and they were all selected for their best psychological health. They were mostly white middle-class students. The 24 undergrads were told that they would be participating in an experiment simulating prison life, and their roles were assigned at random. Zimbardo himself played the role as the superintendent, and an undergraduate research assistant played the role of the warden. The guards were all given same shirts and khaki pants, as well as mirrored sunglasses to refrain from any sort of eye contact, and wooden batons that they were told not to use for any violent purposes. All the prisoners were given ill-fitting smocks and caps that would make them uncomfortable while they were in this role. They were also given a chain around their ankles to remind them of their role as prisoners, and numbers were sewn on their shirts that would be their new identity for the remainder of the experiment. Researchers held an orientation session the day before the experiment was actually held, where they explained to all of the prison guards that they would not be allowed to use any violence, but they would go through any methods necessary to depersonalize and de-individualize each of the prisoners. They would make sure that the prisoners only referred to themselves and each other by the numbers on their shirts and could use any sort of means necessary to make sure that they were depressed and felt that their lives were arbitrary and that the prison guards had all the power while the prisoners had none. On the day that the experiment began, the mock prisoners were arrested from their homes, and the local Palo Alto Police Department actually assisted them in bringing them in, fingerprinting them, taking mud shots, and then bringing them to Stanford, where they would be brought to the mock prison and strip searched and given their new identities. The experiment quickly grew out of hand. Although there was an uneventful first day, after only 36 hours, a riot broke out, and the guards started using fire extinguishers on the prisoners without any researchers' permission or supervision. Guards started working extra hours voluntarily in order to squash this rebellion, and one prisoner, 8612, started to go crazy and rage and curse, and after a while it became really evident that he was suffering majorly and he had to be removed from the experiment. Now, false rumors started to circulate that 8612 was going to come back with companions and lead the prisoners to freedom. So in order to squash this sort of rebellion, all of the guards took the prisoners to a more secure location and completely dismantled the prison. After it became evident that no rebellion was coming, they became really angry at having to rebuild the prison, and they took it out on the prisoners. Initially, guards were forcing the prisoners to count off their numbers as a way to just reinforce their new identity and de-individualize them. But at this point, they were using it more as a form of punishment and forcing the prisoners to perform some sort of physical exercise if they messed up, like sit-ups or push-ups. Sanitary conditions started to decline rapidly as methods of punishment became a little more intense. Guards were not allowing the prisoners to defecate or urinate, or perhaps just not allowing them to empty their sanitary buckets. Mattresses had become a really valued item at this point in the Spartan prison, and they would punish the prisoners by taking away their mattress and forcing them to sleep on the cold concrete. It even got so intense as forcing the prisoners to go about nude or even act out forms of sodomy as a way to humiliate the prisoners. Some of the ways that Zimbardo found that the prisoners had completely internalized their role as prisoners was the fact that most of them would accept parole with the stipulation of forfeiting their experiment's pay. And when all of their parole applications were denied and their pay was still removed, they stayed. They didn't quit the experiment, even though at that point they had no reason to continue participating since they were not being compensated for their time. This was one of the many things that Zimbardo showed when he was arguing that the prisoners had completely internalized their roles. Zimbardo brought in Christina Maslach, a graduate student who was going to be conducting interviews and helping to just document the experiment. He was dating her at the time, and he later married her. She expressed some major concerns about the morality of the experiment and got him to end it early after only 6 days of its beginning. Turns out over 50 outsiders were brought in at some point and observed the conditions of the experiment, and Christina was the only one who expressed any concerns. Most of the guards became increasingly cruel as the experiment continued, and approximately 1/3 of the guards exhibited some severe sadistic tendencies throughout this experiment. Most of them were upset when it ended early. And I cannot express this enough. This only happened over the course of 6 days. In psychology, the results of this experiment are said to support situational attribution of behavior as opposed to dispositional attribution of behavior. In layman's terms, this means that a person's behavior can be more influenced by the situation and what's going on around them than some sort of inherent disposition to behave that way. And in this way, it can be compared to the Milgram experiments, which are also quite famous, in which an experimenter got one of the participants to perform what seemed like near fatal electrical shocks to another person, just by being in a position of authority. Now, shortly after these findings were published, there were bloody revolts in San Quentin and Attica, and Zimbardo published his findings and talked to the House Committee on the Judiciary on what he found. There is a lot of criticism and debate over the results of this experiment. Some critics claim that there may have been a selection bias for the participants, and one group of researchers actually conducted a study in which they put out an ad for participation in an experiment very similar to the ones Zimbardo used, only in one of them they used the words prison life, and the other ones they did not. They found that people with more sadistic tendencies tended to reply to the one using prison life. A few other things were Zimbardo's bias in participating in the experiment, and since it's a field test, it's kind of hard to recreate this experiment or really put any numbers to the results. And these days, you wouldn't be able to reproduce this experiment at all since it directly contradicts the moral ethics of psychology we have today. However, in April of 2007, a group of high school students in Waxahachie, Texas, reported to have exhibited some other strange and similar behaviors in a role-playing exercise they had during school. As you guys may have noticed, we've been doing some countdown videos, so why don't you comment and leave me some suggestions on what topics we should count down next. I hope you learned something today. This is one of my favorite psychology experiments, and I hope it can be one of yours too. Leave me some comments, let me know what you think, rate my video, and as always, subscribe to our channel. Thanks. Bye. Yeah. Check my audio. Am I doing all right? Yeah, okay. So do I have to do the whole thing again? I do, don't I? Suckage. All right. Wow, that was recording me the entire time, wasn't it? Nice.